We are the beta testers of the game. Considering how much I especially, talk about it, there is little surprise that issues have been found. My index error videos as an example. And it is assumed by the community that the Warhammer team has just released their rules onto us who have a large collection of expensive models for us to fix the rules. But today we have a patch, another one, very soon after launch. Games Workshop has changed how Aeldari Fate dice work in 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000, so you may think this is good news for Battle Sisters to see a rebalance. But Games Workshop still finds a way to make sure Battle Sisters don't climb up the rankings. They also irritate me as, annoyingly, the Games Workshop article appeared minutes after I released a video on the Adepta Sororitas and Fate dice. The Adepta Sororitas information in that video is still relevant, so there is that. We do also appreciate the Genestealer cult on this channel. Though the changes today are targeting towering units and those with indirect fire, none of which appear in the Genestealer cult index, there is still a minor reduction in our power if you use some particular units. Now, fire prisms have gone up 25 points, and Eldar Fate dice are now once per phase, even more limiting than the Battle Sisters dice, which is once per unit per phase. So in theory, this puts them about level to Sisters in terms of their one faction ability. It will somewhat limit the Eldar tactic to drop piles of mortal wounds in the first turn from indirect fire and just picking some 6s, but they can still use those 6s to cause mortal wounds. And Farseers can still automatically generate a 6 from a Fate dice. But Games Workshop couldn't possibly change Eldar without also hitting the Battle Sisters even harder. So while the Fire Prism has gone up 25 points, the Exorcist has gone up 30 points, and is still more expensive than a Fire Prism, without the ability to change out its missile for what it's targeting, whereas the Fire Prism has 2 firing modes, so you can choose, in the middle of the game, as you're shooting it, which one you want to use. So you can decide if that's fair. Exorcists also cost more than a Whirlwind, without the special ability to cause Battle Shock. The missiles are slightly different, but again, it's up to you if that's fair to have an Exorcist cost more than a Whirlwind. While the Space Marines have other options for indirect fire, this is the only one for Battle Sisters. But the Space Marine Desolation Marines have gone up by 10 points per model. So a squad of 10 is now 340 points instead of 240 points. That should rather discourage people from taking them, or at least taking 3 squads of them. A lot of the issues players had with Fate dice are tackled because they mostly interacted with the units that can do devastating wounds, such as the Towering Wraith Knight and the D-Cannon weapon platforms. As indirect fire weapons, they have gone up in price. Type in the comments if you would still take them at the revised cost of 105 points, up from 80 points. Go on! Eldar have certainly not been nerfed into the ground as some people feared. Knights may have been, and Knights with the Towering rule have gone up by 50 or 60 points each, so your Knights list may have to drop an Armiger just to compensate for the increased points. Things are not as rosy for the Genestealer cult as you'd expect, because of Brood Brothers, or as they're sometimes called, Imperial Guard, also known as Astra Militarum or Cannon Fodder Faction. The indirect fire artillery units have gone up in points by about 20 points each. It's only a minor points change, but it can be very annoying on some of the weapons. The Field Ordnance Battery has gone up by 20 points, just in case you wanted to take the Bombast Field Gun, which can fire indirectly. So there is another reason to have different points values for different weapons. Your heavy las cannons were never overpowered, but now they're paying for it. Interestingly, the heavy weapon squads, with mortars that can fire indirectly, are not affected by this, despite that above change where the unit goes up in price because one of its weapon options is indirect fire. So heavy weapon squads, still a nice option for Genestealer cult units to take as Brood Brothers. So this quickly rebalances what I said in this video linked up there, about indirect fire being dominant and letting Imperial Guard flatten enemies outside of line of sight with a range of artillery choices. Now these units have only increased in points, they haven't changed the rules on them. It is still a very viable tactic, it just isn't as cheap. And we've had a few other changes to other factions. The Plague Marines can now be taken in a squad of 7, like how they're sold. But what do you know? When they're 20 points a model, it was pretty easy to figure out that 7 of them would be 140 points. But now it's been added in as an option. Good job, Games Workshop. Let's do that for, say, all of the others? That would be nice. Could we have that, please? The Tyranid Biovores are up 25 points per model because they had indirect fire, and also a very nice tactic of being able to launch spore mines into the battlefield. Now, they have objective control 0, so they can't hold objectives, but they're very useful for things like behind enemy lines. Just launch a bunch of spore mines behind enemy lines, and there you go. You've achieved it, first turn. The Barb Gaunts remain the same cost, because even though their ability hasn't changed and they could slow down up to 10 units, in theory, they do require line of sight to do so. Also, the Necron Monolith is not affected by the points increase because, well, it didn't need it. But then why hit the Exorcist? And if you think points are all nice and equal and valuable again, as they had been in previous editions, maybe, matter of opinion, well, the Lord of Skulls for the Chaos Space Marines is cheaper than the Lord of Skulls, the same Lord of Skulls, when used by the World Eaters. And the faction abilities are not too much different, so I don't know where that one's come from. So because of this news coming out, you probably missed my video on the Battle System Miracle Dice, so here it is, so you don't miss out. I'm Christian von Carmian, by the way. I am made of bats.